the Mossad agent who fell in love with her target. In the heart of the twisted web of undercover agencies, a secret lays embedded, a tale of fate and betrayal that has shaken the foundations of operations. The core is a woman named Ella, a statuesque Mossad agent known for her intelligence and savvy coldness. Each pursuit her equally deadly target. Trained to execute with precision, Ella was destined to crush the Islamist terrorist group she was following. But as her life became a knife edge, she found herself falling for its leader. The connection she felt with him was uncanny, far beyond the rigors of Mossad recruiting. Despite the ironclad statute of her oath, she could not help herself but be drawn toward his unusual charm, and she eventually compromised her duties. Reports indicate that she left the organization and turned her back on the State of Israel, leaving her Western facade behind. It is believed that, despite her oath, she has fully embraced her new life as a Muslim and blended in seamlessly with the Palestinian culture where she currently resides. The report contends that she has even given birth to a child by her new husband, the leader of the Islamist terrorist group she was previously targeting. Reports indicate that she left the organization and turned her back on the State of Israel, leaving her Western facade behind. It is believed that, despite her oath, she has fully embraced her new life as a Muslim and blended in seamlessly with the Palestinian culture where she currently resides. The report contends that she has even given birth to a child by her new husband, the leader of the Islamist terrorist group she was previously targeting.
9. Margin 5 pix, 8 pix, 0, 0. Color hash C9, A9, 61. Font weight bold. Div container. H1. The Mossad agent who fell in love with her target, and her betrayal nearly collapsed an entire operation. T. The phone didn't ring. It vibrated once against the wooden table in the Vienna safe house, a single pulse that meant everything had changed. Leora Ashkenazi stared at it from across the room, her fingers still wet from washing blood off a forged passport, and knew before she touched it that the message would be about him. About Khalil. The man she was supposed to destroy had just sent her a photograph of the two of them together, taken 3 nights ago in Prague, and beneath it, in Arabic, "I know what you are. Meet me, or I send this everywhere." She picked up the phone with steady hands, though her pulse hammered against her throat. 4 months. 4 months of cover, of carefully constructed lies, of becoming Sarah Lieberman, the cultural attaché of the Austrian embassy who collected rare manuscripts and spoke 6 languages and laughed at the right moments during diplomatic receptions. 4 months of falling in love with a man she was meant to kill.
The safe house smelled of coffee grounds and old paper, the scent of every operation she'd run since joining Kidan 8 years ago. But this one was different. This one had started to feel like something other than duty 3 weeks into surveillance, when Khalil had looked at her across a crowded gallery opening in Berlin and smiled as if he recognized something in her that no one else had ever seen. She opened the encrypted message fully. The photograph showed them sitting at an outdoor cafe in Old Town Prague, her hand almost touching his across the white tablecloth. The angle was professional. Someone had been watching them watch each other. Someone who knew. Leora deleted the message and walked to the window. Vienna stretched below in the gray afternoon light, a city of secrets and old empires where agents died in apartments that looked exactly like this one. She could see the Danube in the distance, a silver thread cutting through history. Her handler would call in 14 minutes, Avi Cohen, who had recruited her out of the IDF's Unit 8200 and taught her that loyalty to the mission was the only loyalty that mattered. Avi, who would terminate her the moment he learned what she'd done, what she'd become, what she was still becoming. She thought about the first time she touched Khalil, 2 months ago in a bookshop in Zurich. He'd been reaching for the same volume of Rumi's poetry, and their fingers had met on the spine. He'd pulled back immediately, apologizing in English with a slight French accent, and she'd smiled and said in Arabic, "You can have it. I've already memorized the best parts." He looked at her then with something like recognition, and later she would understand that he'd been doing the same thing she was, searching for cracks in her cover, testing for authenticity, measuring the distance between who she claimed to be and who she actually was. The problem was that somewhere between Zurich and Vienna, between surveillance reports and stolen hours in anonymous hotel rooms, the distance had collapsed. She'd stopped pretending to be interested in his work as an art dealer specializing in Mesopotamian antiquities. She'd started actually caring about his sister in Damascus, about the nephew who wanted to be a doctor, about the father who died in a Syrian prison for writing poems about freedom. She'd started actually caring about him. The phone vibrated again. Not her handler, a number she didn't recognize, Austrian prefix. The message was brief. Prater, giant wheel, 1 hour. Come alone, where the photograph goes to your embassy, to my contacts, to everyone who would find it interesting. Leora wrote twice, then burned the phone's SIM card in the kitchen sink. The plastic curled and blackened, sending up a thin stream of acrid smoke that made her eyes water. Or maybe that was something else. She checked her watch. 43 minutes until she had to leave. 13 minutes until Avi called. In her bedroom, she opened the false bottom of her suitcase and removed the Jericho 941 pistol she'd carried since her first operation. 17 rounds, recently cleaned, heavy with consequence. She also took out the second phone, the one connected to Tel Aviv through channels that didn't officially exist, and scrolled through the mission file one more time. Khalil al-Najjar, 38 years old, Syrian national, graduate degree from the Sorbonne. On paper, an art dealer with galleries in Geneva and Beirut. In reality, a procurement specialist for Hezbollah, moving money and weapons through the cover of antiquities trade. He'd been careful enough to avoid direct attribution for 6 years, operating in the gray spaces between commerce and terrorism, between culture and war. The mission parameters were clear: establish contact, gain trust, identify his network, and eliminate him before he could finalize a deal that would put Russian anti-aircraft systems into Lebanese hands. The timeline was 3 months. Leora had requested an extension after 2, claiming she was close to identifying his suppliers. Avi had granted her 6 more weeks. That had been a month ago. Since then, Khalil had shown her things that weren't in any intelligence file. The way he closed his eyes when he listened to music, as if it hurt him to hear beauty in a world so determined to destroy it. The scar on his shoulder from a bombing in Aleppo that had killed his best friend. The careful way he handled ancient pottery shards, as if touching something that had survived 2,000 years might teach him how to survive himself. The things that made him human in ways the target profile never mentioned. Her phone rang. Avi. Status, he said without preamble. His voice carried the flat efficiency of a man who'd run operations in places that no longer existed on maps. Progressing. He's comfortable with me now, sharing details about his supply chain. Timeline. 2 weeks, maybe less. There was a pause on the line, the kind of silence that meant Avi was reading something else while talking to her. We're running out of time, Leora. The weapons deal is moving faster than anticipated. Tel Aviv want action, not patience. I understand. Do you? The question was sharper now.
Because your last 3 reports have been thin. Dates and locations, but nothing actionable, nothing we can move on. He's careful. Everyone's careful. That's not the issue. Another pause. Are you all right? Leora looked at her reflection in the darkened window, seeing the ghost of who she used to be, before Vienna, before Khalil, before she'd learned that duty and desire could occupy the same impossible space. I'm fine. Yael is in Vienna as of this morning. Backup if you need it. She's staying at the Sacher under a German cover. Yael Dagan, another Kidon operative, one of the best. Also one of the most ruthlessly efficient killers Leora had ever worked with. Her presence meant Tel Aviv was losing faith in Leora's ability to close this operation. I don't need backup. Nevertheless, she's there. Check in tomorrow, same time. And Leora? Yes? Finish this, however it needs to be finished. The line went dead. Leora stood in the gathering darkness at the safe house, holding a phone that connected her to a life built entirely on the willingness to do what others couldn't. She thought about the first person she'd killed, a Hamas bomb maker in Ramallah 9 years ago, and how she'd thrown up in an alley afterward, shaking so hard she could barely stand. Avi had found her there and said, "It doesn't get easier. It just gets necessary. Remember that." She'd remembered it through a dozen operations, through Cairo and Amman and Istanbul, through nights when she couldn't sleep because the faces of the dead looked too much like people she might have known in another life. She'd remembered it because the alternative was to believe that everything she'd done, everyone she'd hurt, had been for nothing.
But standing in the Vienna safe house with 30 minutes before she had to meet the man she loved and the man she was supposed to kill, the same man, Leora couldn't remember why necessity had ever seemed like enough. She put the gun in her purse and left. The Prater amusement park was nearly empty in the October cold, the summer crowds long gone, leaving only the skeletal remains of carnival joy against a gray sky. The Wiener Riesenrad, the giant wheel, turned slowly above the park, its red gondolas moving through the air like drops of blood on a Ferris wheel built before the world learned to tear itself apart twice in 1 century. Leora bought a ticket and waited. The operator was an old man who didn't look at her face, which meant he'd been paid not to remember anyone who rode alone today. She stepped into an empty gondola and felt it lurch into motion, rising above the city with the kind of inevitability that came from machinery that had been turning for 127 years. Khalil was waiting at the top. He stood against the gondola's window, backlit by the failing light, wearing the same black coat he'd worn the first time she saw him in Berlin. His hands were in his pockets. He didn't smile. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "Or should I call you something else?" Leora's hand was already on the gun in her purse, finger resting against the trigger guard. The distance between them was maybe 3 meters, close enough to be certain, too far to be safe. "Khalil." "You're not going to shoot me." He said it calmly, as if discussing the weather. "If you were, you would have done it already. You've had a dozen chances, better ones than this." "How long have you known?" "About you? 3 weeks. About what you are? Longer." He pulled his right hand from his pocket slowly, showing it empty. Then he reached into his coat and removed a phone, placing it on the seat beside him. "I had people watching you in Prague, professionals. They followed you back to your safe house after you left my hotel. They saw you enter a building that belongs to a shell company with connections to Israel." Then he reached into his coat and removed a phone, placing it on the seat beside him. "I had people watching you in Prague, professionals. They followed you back to your safe house after you left my hotel. They saw you enter a building that belongs to a shell company with connections to Israeli intelligence." The gondola reached its apex and began descending. Below them, Vienna spread out in all directions, a city where Mozart had written requiems and Hitler had learned to hate. A city where secrets aged like wine in cellars no one could find. "So you know what I am," Leora said. "Why am I still alive?" "Because I know what you are, but I don't know why you are." He moved closer, not threatening, just needing to be heard. "You could have killed me in Zurich, in Munich, in that hotel room in Prague when I was sleeping and you were awake at 3 a.m, sitting by the window. I watched you watch me through the reflection in the glass. You had your gun. You didn't use it. Maybe I was gathering intelligence. Maybe." His eyes were dark and certain. "Or maybe you started to believe that not everything about me is what your handlers told you it is. You move weapons for Hezbollah. I move money through art sales. What happens to the money afterward is complicated. People die from those complications. People die from a lot of things." He was close enough now that she could smell the faint scent of cigarettes and old books that always clung to him. People die from airstrikes on apartment buildings in Gaza, from checkpoints where ambulances are stopped too long, from believing that one side has all the righteousness and the other side has all the blame. "Is that what you think? That there's no difference between defending yourself and attacking civilians? I think there's a difference between the world as it should be and the world as it is, and I think you know that better than most." He picked up the phone from the seat. "I could send this photograph to your embassy right now. End your career. Expose your network. I could do it before we reach the bottom of this wheel. Why haven't you?" "Because I'm in love with you," Khalil said simply, "and because I think you might be in love with me. And because maybe, just maybe, that means something in a world where everyone else is just choosing which lies to believe." The gondola passed the midpoint of its descent, moving faster now, rushing toward the ground and whatever waited there. Leora's hand was still on her gun. She could feel the weight of it, the potential of it, the finality of it. One bullet, maybe two for certainty. Then a walk through the Prater, calm and unremarkable, back to a safe house where she'd file a report saying the target had been eliminated during an attempted compromise. Clean, necessary, done. But her finger wouldn't move. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to show you something. Something that will help you understand who I actually am, not who your file says I am." He held up the phone. "After that, if you still want to kill me, I won't stop you. I'll even make it easy. But you have to see this first." "See what?" "The real reason I deal with the people I deal with. The real reason I've spent 6 years in a world that disgusts me." The gondola jerked to a stop at the bottom. The door opened automatically. Outside, the Prater stretched away in the gathering dark, empty except for memories of summers that had died decades ago. "Come with me. 2 hours."
Then you can make your choice with all the information, not just the information they give you. Leora looked at him, at the man she'd been sent to destroy, and realized that everything, her training, her loyalty, her certainty, had been leading to this moment, where none of it seemed to matter as much as the question of whether she could still walk away from something real, just because it was inconvenient to the mission. 2 hours, she said. Then I decide. Then you decide, Khalil agreed. They left the Prater together, walking through the cold October evening like two people who might have met under different circumstances, in a different world, where nations didn't need shadows, and duty didn't require betrayal. Behind them, the giant wheel continued its eternal rotation, lifting and lowering strangers who would never know what had been decided in gondola number 7 on a Thursday in autumn. Khalil led her to a car parked 3 blocks away, a black Mercedes with diplomatic plates. He drove carefully, obeying every signal, checking mirrors with the practiced attention of someone who knew surveillance when he saw it. They crossed the Danube and headed into the 22nd district, an area of Vienna that tourists rarely visited, where immigrants from Turkey and Syria and Afghanistan had built communities that looked nothing like the Habsburg grandeur of the inner Stadt. He parked outside a 6-story apartment building with peeling yellow paint and satellite dishes clustered on balconies like metal flowers reaching for home. "It's the 3rd floor," he said. "Apartment 3B. You can keep your hand on your gun if it makes you feel safer." "It's not about feeling safe." "No," he said quietly. "It never is." They climbed stairs that smelled of cooking spices and old carpet, past doors behind which families were eating dinner and children were doing homework, and lives were being lived in the ordinary way that had nothing to do with intelligence services or targeted killings. Khalil knocked on 3B, 3 quick raps, then 2 slow ones, a pattern that meant something. The door opened. A woman in her 60s stood there, gray hair pulled back, eyes that had seen too much and survived anyway. She looked at Khalil, then at Leora, then back at Khalil. "This is dangerous," she said in Arabic. "I know, Amira, but necessary." The woman stepped aside. Inside, the apartment was small but immaculately kept, the walls covered with photographs and children's drawings, the smell of cardamom tea in the air. In the living room, a group of teenagers sat around a laptop, studying something on the screen with intense concentration. "These are Syrian refugees," Khalil said quietly. "University students who fled Damascus and Aleppo when the war made education impossible. Amira helps them with immigration paperwork, but that's not enough to survive here. They need money, for rent, for food, for the classes that might give them a future." One of the teenagers looked up, a young woman, maybe 19, with intelligent eyes and a hijab the color of summer sky. She saw Khalil and smiled with genuine warmth. "Khalil, did you bring the new books?" "In the car. I'll bring them up." He turned to Leora. "The money I move through art sales, about 60% of it goes where your intelligence service thinks it goes. The other 40%? It comes here, to apartments like this one in Vienna, Berlin, Paris, Geneva, to people who lost everything and are trying to build it back." "That doesn't excuse the other 60%, Leora said. "No, it doesn't." His voice was hollow. "But in the world I come from, the world where your government and mine have spent 70 years finding new ways to destroy each other,
You don't get to be pure. You make compromises that let you sleep at night, because the alternative is to do nothing and watch people starve in countries that have forgotten they exist. Amira brought them tea in small glasses, the sugar cube nestled at the bottom in the way Liar's grandmother used to make it in Tel Aviv before she died. The gesture was so familiar, it hurt. She sat on a worn couch while Khalil talked to the students about their coursework, about exam schedules, about which professors at the University of Vienna might be willing to work with refugees who had fled in the middle of their degree programs. One of the young men, barely 20, with a bandage on his hand, showed Khalil his engineering textbook. "I was studying civil engineering in Damascus before the bombing," he said in careful German. "I want to rebuild, not destroy. Build." Khalil squeezed his shoulder. "Then you'll build, Rashid. You'll build things that last." After 30 minutes, they left. Khalil carried a box of books down to the car, donated textbooks he'd collected from university libraries across Europe, passed along through a network of volunteers who believed that education might be the only weapon that actually built peace instead of destroying it. In the car, he didn't start the engine immediately. "There are 12 apartments like that one that I support directly," he said. "Maybe 100 students total. Young people who should be in Damascus and Beirut and Baghdad, studying and falling in love and arguing about politics in coffee shops. Instead, they're here, trying to remember what hope feels like. And the weapons? The weapons are real. I won't lie to you about that." He turned to face her fully. "I work with people who believe that the only way to protect what's left is through force. I don't always agree with them, but I understand them. I understand what it feels like to watch your country bleed and know that the rest of the world is checking its watch, waiting for you to finish dying so they can sell off the pieces." Leora thought about the mission brief, about the Russian anti-aircraft systems, about what those weapons would mean in the hands of Hezbollah. How many people will die if that deal goes through? I don't know. Some, maybe many. How many of those students will die if it doesn't? More. He said it with certainty. Because the money stops flowing. Because people like Amira can't pay rent. Because hope is expensive, and no one's willing to pay for it anymore, except people like me, who dirty our hands so others can keep theirs clean. It was full dark now, Vienna glowing around them like a jewel set in history's crown, beautiful and oblivious to the calculations being made in a parked car on the edge of the 22nd district. Leora felt the weight of her gun, the weight of her mission, the weight of 8 years spent believing that loyalty and duty were the same thing. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I want you to walk away. Tell your handlers the mission failed, that I disappeared, that you lost the thread. Take whatever consequences come from that, and know that you chose something more complicated than just following orders. They'll send someone else. I know. But maybe by then I'll have figured out how to be something other than what I am. Or maybe I'll be dead and it won't matter." He reached across and took her hand, the gesture so simple and so impossible it felt like drowning. "I'm not asking you to betray your country, Leora. I'm asking you to see that maybe your country's version of truth isn't the only truth that exists." She pulled her hand away. "You're asking me to let you kill Israelis. I'm asking you to let refugees eat. The rest of it, the weapons, the politics, the endless cycle of revenge, that's going to happen whether you kill me or not. But those students in Amira's apartment, they disappear if I disappear. That's the math. That's not math, that's moral blackmail." "Yes," Khalil said softly, "it is. Just like every decision you've made in service to your agency is moral blackmail. The difference is that I'm honest about it." He started the car and drove her back toward the Innenstadt, neither of them speaking, the city scrolling past the windows like a film of someone else's life. When they reached the street corner nearest her safe house, close enough to walk, far enough to maintain deniability, "I'm asking you to see that maybe your country's version of truth isn't the only truth that exists." She pulled her hand away. "You're asking me to let you kill Israelis. I'm asking you to let refugees eat. The rest of it, the weapons, the politics, the endless cycle of revenge, that's going to happen whether you kill me or not. But those students in Amira's apartment, they disappear if I disappear. That's the math. That's not math, that's moral blackmail. Yes, Khalil said softly, it is. Just like every decision you've made in service to your agency is moral blackmail. The difference is that I'm honest about it. He started the car and drove her back toward the Interstadt, neither of them speaking, the city scrolling past the windows like a film of someone else's life. When they reached the street corner nearest her safe house, close enough to walk, far enough to maintain deniability, he stopped. "Thank you for seeing what I wanted you to see," he said. Leora opened the door, one foot on the pavement, one foot still in the car, suspended between two futures. "Khalil." "Yes." "Don't contact me again. Don't send messages. Don't call." "I understand." "I mean it." "I know you do." He looked at her with something that might have been love or might have been grief or might have been both things tangled together so tightly they couldn't be separated. "For what it's worth, meeting you was the first thing in 6 years that made me think maybe the world isn't completely broken, even if it ends like this." She got out of the car and walked away without looking back, her hand wrapped around the gun in her purse, her mind calculating trajectories and consequences and the infinite distance between what was right and what was possible.
Back in the safe house, she sat in the dark for 2 hours, not moving, not thinking, just existing in the space between decision and action. At midnight, she opened her secure phone and typed a message to Avi. "Target compromised. Evidence suggests leak in operational security. Recommend abort and reassess." She stared at the message for 5 minutes before deleting it. Then she typed, "Target location confirmed for Friday, 1400, Cafe Central. Request authorization to proceed." She sent it before she could change her mind. The response came back in 30 seconds. "Authorized. Yao will be on site for backup. Execute on opportunity." Leora turned off the phone and went to bed, but she didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness of a Vienna safe house and thought about all the people she'd killed for duty, and all the people who would die if she didn't kill one more, and the impossibility of knowing which lives mattered more when every life was supposed to matter the same. At dawn, she made coffee and cleaned her gun, the ritual actions of someone preparing for the only thing they knew how to do. At noon, she sent Khalil a message from a burner phone. "Cafe Central, 1400, we need to talk. Last time, I promise." His response came 10 minutes later. "It'll be there." She burned the phone in the kitchen sink and watched the plastic melt, thinking about all the other things that burned when you couldn't carry them anymore. Cafe Central occupied a piece of Vienna that seemed to exist outside of time, all high ceilings and marble columns, and the ghosts of Freud and Trotsky arguing over coffee that had gone cold a century ago. Leora arrived at 1345, early enough to check the sightlines, late enough that she wouldn't seem suspicious. She chose a table near the back, against a wall, with clear views of the entrance and the emergency exit through the kitchen. Yael would be somewhere close, watching through a scope or a window, ready to take the shot if Leora couldn't or wouldn't. The backup plan for when duty required insurance against doubt. At 1400 exactly, Khalil walked in. He wore a gray suit that made him look like any other businessman meeting a colleague for coffee in a city built on commerce and compromise. He saw her and smiled slightly, the expression of someone who knew this might be the last smile he ever gave. He sat down across from her. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep." "Neither did I." He ordered coffee from a waiter who moved like he'd been serving tables since the Habsburgs fell. Then he looked at Leora with the full weight of his attention. "You're going to kill me today, aren't you?" She didn't answer immediately. Outside the tall windows, Vienna continued its endless performance of civility. People walking to jobs and appointments and lunch dates, completely unaware that in a cafe where revolutionaries once plotted the future, 2 people were negotiating death. "I don't want to," she said finally. "But you will." "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You knew when you sent the message. You knew when you woke up this morning. You're doing me the courtesy of saying goodbye before you do what you were trained to do." He leaned back as the waiter delivered coffee in delicate porcelain cups that had survived 2 world wars.
I appreciate it, actually. It's more kindness than most people in our business receive. Those students, Leora said. Amira? The apartments? That's real? Every word. And the weapons? Also real. Then you know I don't have a choice.
Everyone has a choice, Leora. That's the lie they teach us, that duty removes choice. But it doesn't. It just makes the cost of choosing differently too high to imagine. He drank his coffee calmly, as if this were any other afternoon. So, what's the plan? Poison in the cup? A shot as I leave? Or something more subtle that lets you walk away clean? I haven't decided. Well, while you're deciding, let me tell you something that's not in your file. He set down his cup with precision. The weapons deal you're trying to stop? It's not happening. Leora felt something cold move through her chest. What? The Russian systems your handlers are worried about? The deal fell through 3 weeks ago. Political complications, logistics, the usual chaos. I didn't tell anyone because keeping the appearance of the deal alive was useful. It meant money kept flowing for the refugees while I figured out what to do next. You're lying. I can prove it. I can give you documents, communication logs, everything you need to verify it. The deal is dead, which means killing me accomplishes nothing except removing someone who's trying to keep 100 university students from drowning in a city that barely wants them to exist. Leora's hand moved inside her purse, finding the grip of her gun, the metal warm from being carried close to her body all day. Her training said this was the moment, when the target was off balance, distracted by their own admission, vulnerable. But her training had never accounted for this particular configuration of truth and consequence. Show me, she said. Khalil reached slowly into his jacket, showing his hands, making the movement obvious, and removed a phone. He unlocked it and slid it across the table. Third folder from the top, the one labeled Commerce.
Emails from the Russian contact, dated 10 days ago, canceling the shipment. Contract termination paperwork. Everything. She picked up the phone with her left hand, keeping her right on the gun. The emails were there, exactly as he'd described. Technical language about logistics issues and regulatory complications, but the meaning was clear. The deal was off. The weapons weren't coming. This could be fabricated, she said. It could be, but it's not. You can verify it through your own channels. It'll take maybe 6 hours. Meanwhile, I'll still be in Vienna, still at my hotel, still exactly where you can find me if you decide I'm lying. The cafe hummed with the afternoon crowd, tourists and locals eating soccer tort and drinking melange and talking about things that didn't involve deciding who lived and who died based on incomplete information and impossible calculations. Leora felt the weight of it all pressing down. The mission, the lie, the truth, the love, the duty, the students in the 22nd district, the soldiers on the Lebanese border who might die from weapons that were no longer coming, the endless equation that never balanced. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because I'm tired of pretending that survival requires lying to everyone all the time, and because I want you to know that if you kill me today, it won't be for the reason they sent you. It'll be for something else. Maybe that makes it easier. Maybe it makes it harder. But at least it'll be true. A shadow moved past the cafe window, quick, professional. The kind of movement that meant someone was in position. Yael. Watching through a scope mounted in an apartment across the street, calculating wind and distance, and the trajectory that would end this conversation with certainty. Leora had maybe 2 minutes before Tel Aviv expected confirmation.
Before Avi called demanding status, before the operation moved from her hands into someone else's. "Come with me," she said suddenly. Khalil looked at her with surprise. "What?" "Right now. We walk out of here together, we get in a car, and we drive somewhere that isn't part of anyone's operation. I buy us maybe 12 hours before they figure out what happened. We use that time to decide what's real and what's theater. They'll kill you for that. Maybe. Or maybe I'll convince them that extracting you alive was worth more than killing you dead." She was lying. She knew it. He knew it. Yael probably knew it through whatever audio feed was running, but the lie felt more honest than any truth she'd told in months. 12 hours. Then we both make real choices with real information. Khalil studied her face,
searching for the crack in the cover, the tell that would reveal whether this was mercy or the setup for something worse. If you're playing me, I'm not. I'm improvising. There's a difference. He stood up slowly, dropping bills on the table that would more than cover their coffee. Where? I know a place. Somewhere they won't look for 6 hours, maybe 8. After that, all bets are off. They walked out of Café Central together, Leora's hand in her purse, wrapped around the gun she hadn't fired. Khalil half a step behind her, close enough that Yal wouldn't have a clean shot without risking hitting them both. Outside, Vienna was cold and bright, the kind of autumn afternoon that felt stolen from a gentler season. Leora's phone buzzed in her pocket. Avi. She ignored it. They walked 3 blocks to where she'd parked a rental car that morning, using credit cards that didn't officially exist.
She drove north out of the city, into the Vienna woods, where the trees were already bare, and the small towns looked like they'd been sleeping since the empire collapsed. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavier than words. An hour outside Vienna, she pulled into the parking lot of a small guest house that advertised rooms by the week and asked no questions as long as payment was in cash. They checked in using fake names that weren't the ones from their primary covers, layers of deception building on layers, until the truth was buried so deep it might never surface. The room was basic: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a window overlooking a forest that had watched empires rise and fall and didn't care about either. Leora locked the door and turned off her phone, severing the connection to Tel Aviv, to Avi, to the mission that had started to feel like drowning. Khalil stood by the window, looking out at the trees. Now what? Now we talk. Really talk. No surveillance, no handlers, no one listening except us. About what? About what we do next. About whether anything we've said to each other is true. About whether people like us get to have something real, or if we're just ghosts pretending to be human until someone remembers to turn out the lights. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the same exhaustion she felt every morning when she woke up in safe houses across Europe, wondering whether she'd finally become the person she'd been pretending to be for so long that the difference didn't matter. I love you, he said. That's true. I don't know what to do with it, but it's true. I know, Leora said. That's the problem. They sat at the small table while afternoon became evening, while evening became night, while the forest outside grew dark and silent and full of things that lived without needing permission or orders or certainty. They talked about Khalil's sister. They sat at the small table while afternoon became evening, while evening became night, while the forest outside grew dark and silent and full of things that lived without needing permission or orders or certainty. They talked about Khalil's sister in Damascus, about Leora's father who died in Lebanon in 1982, believing that dying for your country meant something more than just dying. They talked about the students in Vienna and the soldiers on both sides of borders that kept redrawing themselves in blood and compromise. They talked about everything except the only question that mattered. What happened when morning came and the 12 hours were over, and the world remembered they existed? Around midnight, Leora's phone, still turned off, vibrated with the persistent urgency of messages piling up from Tel Aviv. She didn't check them. She knew what they said. Mission status, demand for confirmation, threat of abort. The entire infrastructure of duty building toward the moment when she would have to choose between the lie that loved her and the truth that didn't. They're going to come for both of us, Khalil said quietly. You know that. Yes. So what do we do? Leora looked at him across the table in a room that smelled of old wood and older secrets, and realized that all the training in the world, all the operational experience, all the certainty about duty and loyalty, and who deserved to live and who deserved to die, none of it had prepared her for the simple, impossible question of what you do when the mission becomes the thing you're running from instead of toward.
We run, she said. Not forever, just long enough to figure out if there's a way to stop running. Where? I don't know yet. Somewhere neither of our agencies can reach easily. Somewhere we can think, instead of just surviving.
She reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture feeling both natural and impossible, like speaking a language she'd learned but never practiced. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe they find us in a week or a month or a year, but at least we'll have tried something other than killing each other because someone else told us to. That's treason, Khalil said. Yes. For both of us. Yes. He was quiet for a long time, processing the mathematics of betrayal, calculating what they'd lose against what they might gain. Then he squeezed her hand. Where do people like us go when we stop being who we were? South America, maybe. Southeast Asia. Somewhere with weak extradition treaties and strong corruption. Somewhere we can buy enough time to become someone else. And the student. She reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture feeling both natural and impossible, like speaking a language she'd learned but never practiced. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe they find us in a week or a month or a year, but at least we'll have tried something other than killing each other because someone else told us to. That's treason, Khalil said. Yes. For both of us. Yes. He was quiet for a long time, processing the mathematics of betrayal, calculating what they'd lose against what they might gain. Then he squeezed her hand. Where do people like us go when we stop being who we were? South America, maybe. Southeast Asia. Somewhere with weak extradition treaties and strong corruption. Somewhere we can buy enough time to become someone else. And the students? I'll transfer the funds I have access to before we leave, enough to keep the apartments running for 6 months. After that, she trailed off, the rest of the sentence too heavy to finish. After that, they're on their own, Khalil completed, like everyone else. They left the guest house at dawn, driving west into Austria's mountain regions, where borders blurred and surveillance was less absolute. Leora had contacts in Innsbruck, old assets from a previous operation who owed her favors and didn't ask questions. They could get passports there, clean documents that would hold up to casual inspection, maybe buy them enough time to reach the next stepping stone toward whatever life existed outside the maze of duty and deception. Her phone buzzed again. This time she turned it on long enough to read the messages. 17 from Avi, each one more urgent than the last. 3 from Yael, concise and professional. Status: confirm location. Abort authority granted. Recommend immediate extraction. The last message was from a number she didn't recognize, but the text made her stomach drop. We have identified your location. Give yourself up in the next 6 hours or face permanent termination. This is not negotiable. Deputy Director. She showed it to Khalil. How long do we actually have? He asked. 3 hours, maybe 4. They always pad the deadline to create urgency, but if they've actually found us, they're already moving assets into position. So we run faster. We run smarter. She pulled over at a rest stop and opened the trunk of the car, removing a bag she'd kept there since Vienna. Emergency supplies, cash, backup weapons, everything an operative needed when operations collapsed. I have a plan. It's not a good plan, but it's a plan. I'm listening. We split up. You take the car and head for the Italian border. They'll follow you because the car is tagged, has been since Vienna. I'll double back toward the Enna using secondary transport, make it look like I'm trying to extract alone. It gives you maybe 8 hours to get across the border before they realize the play. And you? I turn myself in. Tell them you played me, that I was compromised but realized it in time, that I came back to make it right. They'll never believe that. They will if I give them something valuable, like the real names of your contacts, your network, everything that makes you useful. She saw his expression change. I won't actually give them the real information. I'll fabricate enough to satisfy the immediate questioning, buy you time to get clear, then deal with the consequences later. The consequences will be bad. Yes. So you're sacrificing yourself so I can escape. That's the plan. That's one version of it.
Khalil took the keys from her hand and threw them into the trees bordering the rest stop, the small act of violence the only protest he could make against an impossible situation. No, we stay together. If we're going to burn, we burn together. That's not rational. Since when has any of this been rational? He pulled her close, the embrace fierce and desperate and real. I've spent 6 years making calculations about who lives and who dies based on what serves the mission. I'm done calculating. If loving you is what gets me killed, then at least I'll die for something that actually matters. They stood in the parking lot of an Austrian rest stop, while trucks rumbled past carrying goods across borders that had once been walls and might be walls again. And Leora felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt since she was 19, and believed that people could be good without compromise, that duty and love could coexist, that the world wasn't just a series of choices between bad and worse. Okay, she said, together, but we need to move now. They abandoned the car and hitched a ride with a Polish truck driver who was heading to Innsbruck and asked for nothing except company on a long drive. He played classical music on the radio, Chopin, melancholy and beautiful, and didn't ask why 2 people who looked like they were running were getting into his truck at a rest stop on a Thursday morning. In Innsbruck, Leora's contact was exactly where he'd always been, operating a small printing business that specialized in concert posters and occasionally in documents that helped people become other people. His name was Werner. He was 73 years old, and he'd been printing false paper since the Cold War because he believed that borders were tyranny and freedom required forgery. 2 passports, Leora said, laying cash on his counter. Canadian.
Good enough to pass automated screening, but not deep investigation. Can you do it? Werner looked at her, then at Khalil, then back at her. You're hot. Israeli intelligence, probably? What did you do? Fell in love with the wrong person. That'll do it. He counted the cash, then went to his back room. 2 hours later, they were Rebecca Cohen and Michael Hartman from Toronto, traveling through Europe on holiday, their passports bearing entry stamps from 6 different countries and wear patterns that suggested years of legitimate use. These will hold for maybe 2 weeks, Werner said. After that, they'll start showing up in watch lists. Use them to get somewhere, then burn them and become someone else. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just try to stay alive. People who fall in love in our world usually end up dead. I'd like to believe there are exceptions. They left Innsbruck on a train bound for Munich, then another train to Frankfurt, moving through Europe's transportation network like water through cracks, always flowing toward the next opening. At the Frankfurt airport, they bought tickets to Sao Paulo on different airlines, different flights, with a plan to meet at a hotel near Copacabana, using contact protocols that Leora had established years ago for emergencies exactly like this. At the gate, waiting to board, Khalil turned to her. What if we make it? What if we actually get away? Then we figure out how to be ordinary people who used to be extraordinary liars. Do people like us get to be ordinary? I don't know. But I'd like to find out. They boarded separately, sitting in different sections of the plane, not acknowledging each other as the aircraft lifted off from German soil and turned south toward a hemisphere where winter was summer. And maybe, just maybe, people who'd spent their lives in shadows could learn to exist in light. Leora looked out the window at Europe falling away below, the cities where she'd lied and killed and pretended to be someone she wasn't, the countries that had trained her to believe that duty was the only truth worth serving. It was all getting smaller, less absolute, just geography instead of destiny. She didn't know if they'd make it. The rational part of her, the part that had survived 8 years in Kidon, said the odds were maybe 30%, maybe less. Tel Aviv had resources, patience, and a very long memory. They'd already be working the airports, the hotels, the networks that caught people trying to disappear. But the other part of her, the part that had started to remember what it felt like to want something more than just completion of the mission, thought that maybe 30% was better than 0. Maybe it was enough. 10 hours later, she landed in Sao Paulo, passed through immigration using her Canadian passport, and took a taxi to the hotel in Copacabana. She checked in, went to her room, and waited. Khalil's flight was due to arrive in 3 hours. After that, they'd have maybe a week before someone noticed the coincidence of 2 people with their profiles arriving in Brazil within hours of each other. A week to decide what came next, where to go, how to live. whether people who'd spent their entire adult lives in service to nations that didn't care if they lived or died could find something worth surviving for besides survival itself. At midnight, there was a knock on her door.
She checked through the peephole, saw Khalil standing in the hallway looking exhausted and real and alive, and opened it. "We made it," he said. "We made it to here. The rest is still uncertain." "I'll take uncertain. Uncertain is better than dead." They sat on the small balcony overlooking a beach where people who had never heard of Mossad or Hezbollah were playing volleyball in the moonlight, laughing in Portuguese, living lives that had nothing to do with intelligence services or targeted killings or the endless calculation of who deserved to live and who deserved to die. "What do we do now?" Khalil asked. Leora thought about all the training that had brought her to this moment, all the certainty about duty and loyalty that had sustained her through operations in Cairo and Amman and Vienna. She thought about Avi, who had taught her that the mission was everything. She thought about the students in the apartments in the 22nd district who would wake up tomorrow and wonder why the money had stopped coming. She thought about all of it, and then she let it go. "We learned to be human again," she said. "Or maybe for the first time. We figure out what matters when duty isn't there to tell us. We make mistakes and fix them and make new ones. We try. That's not much of a plan? No, but it's ours." They sat on the balcony until dawn, watching the Atlantic catch the first light. Two people who'd spent their lives in shadows, learning how to exist in the sun. They didn't talk about what would happen when Tel Aviv found them, or when Khalil's former associates came looking for answers, or when the past finally caught up to the present, the way it always did for people who lived the way they'd lived.
They just sat together, holding hands, being ordinary for the first time in years, and pretended that ordinary might be enough. 3 days later, Leora's burner phone rang. She'd been expecting it. The number was blocked, but she knew who it was before she answered. "Avi." "You disappointed me, Leora." His voice was flat, empty of everything except professional assessment. 8 years, 12 successful operations. I trained you myself, and you threw it all away. For what? A target? Someone who moves weapons for people who want to kill us? He's more than that. Everyone is more than that. That's not the point. The point is that you made a choice that puts the entire network at risk. You gave away operational security for personal feeling. That's not acceptable. I know. Do you? There was something in his voice now, something that might have been disappointment or might have been pity. You think you're the first operative to fall for a target. You think this is new? It's not. It happens. We plan for it. We have protocols for when it happens. What are the protocols? Termination. Both of you. Clean, quiet, final. That's how we protect the mission from compromise. He paused. But I'm calling to offer you something else. A way back. I'm listening. Give us Khalil. His network, his contacts, his suppliers, everything he showed you, everything he told you. We use that information to roll up his operation, and you come home. Disciplinary action, probably some time in a desk job, but you stay alive, and you stay in the family. And Khalil? Khalil dies. But that was always going to happen. This way, at least it means something.
Leora looked across the hotel room to where Khalil was sleeping, his breathing steady and peaceful in a way she'd never seen during all the months of surveillance in Vienna. She thought about the students in the apartments, about Amira making tea, about all the small acts of decency that existed in the margins of the violence that people like her and Avi spent their lives orchestrating. "No," she said. "Think about it carefully, Leora. You're choosing him over everything, over your country, over your career, over your future. That's not a small thing. I know what I'm choosing." "Then I'm sorry. I really am." The line went dead. Khalil woke up 10 minutes later. "Who was that?" My handler. Offering me a way back if I give you up. What did you say? I said no. He sat up, fully awake now, processing the implications. They'll come for us. Yes. How long do we have? Days, maybe a week if we're lucky. Then we keep moving. Argentina, maybe, or Uruguay, somewhere with enough corruption that we can buy time. But Leora was thinking about something else, something that had been forming in her mind since they'd left Vienna. What if we didn't run? What? What if instead of running, we told the truth? All of it. What you do, what I did, what both our agencies do in the shadows. Make it public enough that killing us becomes complicated. That's suicide. Both agencies would come after us. We'd be targets forever. Maybe. Or maybe we'd be too visible to kill quietly. Maybe the only way to survive being ghosts is to become real people with real stories that real journalists care about. Khalil stared at her. You're serious? I am.
We find a reporter, someone with credibility, someone who can't be easily silenced. We tell them everything, the operations, the compromises, the students in Vienna, the weapons that didn't ship, the whole complicated mess of trying to be decent people in an indecent business. We make ourselves so public that shadows can't hide us anymore. That's not protection, that's exposure. Exposure is the only protection people like us have left. Once the agencies decide we're liabilities, running just delays the inevitable. But if we're public enough, if the story is big enough, maybe they decide it's not worth the risk. They argued about it for hours, weighing the mathematics of survival, calculating odds that refused to add up to anything like certainty. In the end, Khalil agreed, not because he believed it would work, but because he couldn't think of anything better, and running forever eventually meant running until you couldn't anymore. They found a journalist in Sao Paulo, a Brazilian woman named Ana Carvalho, who'd built a career exposing government corruption and surviving the consequences. She met them in a cafe that overlooked the Ibirapuera Park, skeptical at first, then increasingly intrigued as they told her their story. This is big, she said finally, bigger than you probably realize. If even half of what you're saying is verifiable, this is a story about how intelligence services on both sides use the rhetoric of security to justify operations that have nothing to do with keeping anyone safe. Can you protect us? Leora asked. I can make you visible. I can't make you invulnerable. But visibility is something. It's better than nothing. They spent 3 days with Ana, providing documents, verifying details, building a story that would run simultaneously in Brazilian, European, and American outlets.
Anna was thorough, careful, aware that getting this wrong meant her own career and possibly her life. She checked everything twice, verified sources, built corroboration until the story was unassailable. The articles ran on a Monday morning, splashed across front pages and news sites around. Anna was thorough, careful, aware that getting this wrong meant her own career and possibly her life. She checked everything twice, verified sources, built corroboration until the story was unassailable. The articles ran on a Monday morning, splashed across front pages and news sites around the world. Israeli agent and Hezbollah operative expose shadow war. The details were explosive. Operations in Vienna, refugees in safe houses, weapons deals that collapsed, a love affair that threatened to destroy networks on both sides. Within hours, Leora and Khalil were the most visible former intelligence operatives in the world. News crews camped outside their hotel. Requests for interviews flooded in from every major outlet. Their faces were everywhere, their story dissected and analyzed and argued over by people who'd never had to make the choices they'd made. And for a while, it worked. The visibility protected them. Both agencies issued terse denials and moved on, unwilling to confirm or deny stories that made them look bad in front of global audiences that were increasingly skeptical of secret wars fought in the margins of democracy. But 3 weeks after the story broke, Leora got a message from a number she didn't recognize. Congratulations, you bought yourself time. But time runs out. Eventually, the world stops watching. When it does, we'll be here. A friend from Vienna. She showed it to Khalil. Yael, she said, she never gives up. So we're still running, just with an audience now. For now, maybe forever, I don't know. They moved to Portugal, then to Morocco, then to a small town in northern Thailand where tourists rarely went and locals didn't care about intelligence services from countries they'd never visit.
They set up a life that looked almost normal, teaching languages to local students, running a small bookshop that specialized in poetry and philosophy, trying to learn how to exist in daylight after years of living in shadow. Some days, it almost worked. They'd wake up in a house that wasn't a safe house, drink coffee that wasn't part of a cover, walk through a market where no one was surveilling them, and pretend that ordinary life was possible for people who'd spent years being extraordinary in all the wrong ways. But other days, Leora would see someone watching from across the street, and her hand would move automatically toward a gun that wasn't there anymore. Or Khalil would get a message from Amira saying another apartment had closed, another group of students had scattered, another small victory against chaos had collapsed because the money stopped coming. They learned to live with the uncertainty, the way people who survive wars learn to live with scars that ache when the weather changes. They learned that running forever eventually becomes a kind of staying, and that maybe the point wasn't to escape the past, but to carry it without letting it crush them. 5 years later, they were still alive, still together, still looking over their shoulders, but less often, less urgently, as if the agencies that had wanted them dead had decided that two middle-aged people running a bookshop in northern Thailand weren't worth the resources it would take to eliminate them. Or maybe they were just waiting for the right moment, and the right moment hadn't come yet. Either way, Leora and Khalil existed in the space between safety and danger, between truth and deception, between the people they used to be and the people they were trying to become. Some days that space felt like freedom. Other days it felt like a different kind of prison.
But it was theirs, and that was something. Maybe it was enough. On a Wednesday morning in March, Leora opened their bookshop to find a package waiting on the doorstep. No return address, no markings except her name written in careful script that looked almost like Ava's handwriting, but not quite. Inside was a single photograph, her and Khalil standing together at the market the previous week, smiling at each other like people who believed they might survive happiness. On the back, in the same careful script, "We haven't forgotten, but sometimes mercy is more useful than justice. Stay visible, stay careful. A colleague who wishes you well." She showed it to Khalil. He read it twice, then handed it back. A warning or a blessing? Both, probably. That's how these things work. They burned the photograph in the fireplace that night, watching the image curl and blacken and disappear into ash, another ghost among all the others they'd collected over the years. Then they locked the doors, turned out the lights, and went to bed in a house that wasn't safe, but was theirs. Outside, the world continued turning. Nations continued their secret wars, and intelligence services continued the endless work of deciding who lived and who died, based on calculations that never accounted for love or mercy or the possibility that sometimes people deserved to survive even when they'd broken all the rules. And in a small town in northern Thailand, two people who'd spent their lives in shadows learned to sleep without nightmares, or at least with nightmares they could carry until morning. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even safety. But it was life. And sometimes, for people like them, life was the only victory worth counting.